The cold metal of a wedding ring hit the wooden floor of the one-room schoolhouse with a hollow ping that echoed through Willow Norman's chest. Her husband Stephen's face was stone as he looked at her with eyes that had long since lost their warmth. 5 years, Willow. 5 years, and your womb remains as barren as the desert, he said, his voice carrying to the curious ears of the townspeople who had gathered outside the schoolhouse windows. I've made arrangements with the stagecoach. You leave tomorrow. I'll not waste more of my life on a woman who cannot give me sons. Willow's trembling fingers reached for the ring, the gold still warm from her hand. The year was 1872, and in the small town of Dry Creek, Arizona Territory, a woman's worth was measured by her ability to bear children. At 26, Willow had failed at the one thing expected of her, and now she would pay the price. The whispers had started 3 years into their marriage. The sidelong glances from the women after church, the pitying looks from the men. Poor Stephen, they would murmur. Married to that barren schoolteacher. What had once been a respectable position educating the children of Dry Creek had become a cruel reminder of what she could not have. You would cast me aside? After all these years? Her voice was barely audible, but dignity kept her spine straight. Stephen adjusted his suit jacket, a banker's uniform of respectability. The papers are drawn. The marriage is dissolved. The house and all assets remain with me. You'll receive a small stipend to establish yourself elsewhere. He spoke as if discussing a business transaction rather than the dismantling of their life together. Where am I to go? Willow asked, though she already knew the answer. Nowhere. She was to go nowhere and become no one. Your cousin in Silverton wrote that they need a teacher. I've purchased your ticket. Stephen turned to leave, then paused. I'll be remarried by Christmas. Eleanor Miller has already accepted my proposal. The door closed behind him with finality, leaving Willow alone in the schoolhouse that had been her sanctuary. Eleanor Miller, 20 years old and known for her wide hips and cheerful disposition. Of course. Willow waited until the sound of boots on the boardwalk faded before she allowed herself to collapse into her chair. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating the chalk dust that hung in the air, making it look like gold. 5 years of marriage dissolved in less than 5 minutes. The following morning dawned bright and merciless. Willow stood at the stagecoach stop with a single trunk containing her personal belongings. Stephen had not come to see her off, but most of the town had gathered, their expressions a mixture of pity and relief. A barren woman was bad luck, some said. Better to send her away before her condition spread to others. Mrs. Norman. The stagecoach driver tipped his hat, then caught himself. Miss Willow, I mean. The correction stung. She was no longer Mrs. Norman. She was no one. The journey to Silverton was 3 days of dust and discomfort. Willow spent most of it staring out the window, watching the landscape change from desert to rolling grasslands to the foothills of mountains. She had never been this far north before. The other passengers kept their distance, as if her perceived failure might be contagious. On the 3rd day, the stagecoach rolled into Silverton, Colorado Territory, a mining town nestled in a valley surrounded by towering peaks. The September air was crisp and thin, making Willow lightheaded as she stepped down onto the street. Willow Norman. A woman approached, her face kind beneath a practical bonnet. I'm Martha, your cousin Abel's wife. We've been expecting you. Martha's welcome was warm, but the small mining town of Silverton was not much different from Dry Creek in its attitudes. Though her cousin and his wife were kind enough to offer her a room in their home, Willow soon discovered that the position of schoolteacher had already been filled. I'm afraid there was a misunderstanding, the town mayor explained, looking uncomfortable. We hired someone 3 weeks ago, a man. More suitable for controlling the rowdier boys, you understand. More suitable. The words echoed in Willow's mind as she walked back to her cousin's house. Always unsuitable. As a wife. As a mother. Now as a teacher. Martha met her at the door with a sympathetic smile. There's a position open at the Silver Bell Saloon. They need someone to serve drinks and keep the books. Willow's education had prepared her for teaching children, not serving whiskey to minors. But beggars could not be choosers, and she needed to support herself. The next morning, she presented herself to Mabel Turner, the owner of the Silver Bell. You ever worked in a saloon before, honey? Mabel asked, looking Willow up and down. No, madam. Well, you're pretty enough, and you can read and write. That's more than most of the girls who come through here. You'll serve drinks, keep the books, and help with the cleaning. No funny business with the customers. I run a respectable establishment. Respectable was a relative term in a mining town saloon, but Willow was in no position to be particular. She started that evening, trading her modest day dress for one of Mabel's spares of burgundy affair with more lace than Willow had ever worn in her life. The Silver Bell was crowded with miners fresh from their shifts, the air thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. Willow moved between the tables, carrying trays of whiskey and trying to ignore the comments about her appearance. She kept her eyes down and her responses polite but distant. It was near midnight when the doors swung open and a hush fell over the saloon. Willow looked up to see a man standing in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, with a quiet authority that commanded attention without effort. Unlike the miners with their dirt-ingrained hands and weathered faces, this man wore the dust of the trail as if it were a temporary inconvenience rather than a permanent condition. "Jackson," Mabel called out warmly. "Been a while." "Mabel," he nodded, making his way to the bar. His spurs jingled softly with each step, marking him as a horseman rather than a miner. His clothes were trail-worn but of good quality denim pants, a faded blue shirt, a leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that he removed as he approached the bar, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Usual?" Mabel asked, already reaching for a bottle. "Obliged," he replied, his voice deep and gentle. Willow found herself staring and quickly looked away when his gaze swept the room and briefly caught hers. There was something about him that seemed out of place in the rowdy saloon, a quietness, a self-containment that set him apart. "Who was that?" she whispered to Mabel when she returned to the bar for more drinks. "Jackson Ryder," Mabel answered, filling glasses. "Owns the Double R Ranch about 10 miles west of here. Brings his cattle to market twice a year. Good man. Fair employer. Keeps to himself mostly. A rancher then. Not a drifter or a cowhand, but a man with property and responsibilities." Willow delivered her tray of drinks and continued her work, but she was aware of his presence at the bar, nursing his whiskey and observing the room with watchful eyes. It was nearly closing time when trouble arrived in the form of 3 miners who had clearly been drinking long before they entered the Silver Bell. Their loud voices and aggressive movements set Willow on edge as she tried to navigate around them. "Well, ain't you a pretty thing?" one of them slurred, grabbing her wrist as she passed. "New girl, huh? How about you and me get better acquainted?" "Please release me, sir," Willow said firmly, trying to pull away without causing a scene. "Now don't be like that." The miner tightened his grip. "Just being friendly-like." "The lady asked you to let go." The quiet voice came from behind Willow. Jackson Ryder had approached without a sound, and now stood with his hand resting casually on his belt, not far from the holstered revolver at his hip. The miner scowled but released Willow's wrist. "Didn't mean no harm, Ryder. Just talking to the new girl. She's not interested in your conversation." Jackson's tone was mild, but there was steel beneath it. "I suggest you and your friends call it a night." For a moment, it seemed the miner might argue, but something in Jackson's steady gaze made him reconsider. With a muttered curse, he gathered his companions and stumbled toward the door. "Thank you," Willow said when they had gone. Jackson nodded, his eyes a clear, startling blue meeting hers briefly. No man has the right to put his hands on a woman without her permission. He replaced his hat. "Evening, madam," he said, and then he was gone, the doors swinging behind him. Willow rubbed her wrist, watching the space where he had been. In Dry Creek, Stephen would have looked the other way, unwilling to involve himself in an unpleasant scene. Jackson Ryder had stepped in without hesitation, without fanfare, simply because it was the right thing to do. "Told you he was a good man," Mabel said, appearing at Willow's side. "Too good for most of the women around here, which is why he's still unmarried at 32. "I wasn't wondering about his marital status," Willow protested. Mabel just laughed. "Sure you weren't, honey. Every unattached female within 50 miles wonders about Jackson Ryder's marital status. Man like that land, cattle, and looks to boot is quite the catch. But he's particular. Lost his wife and baby in childbirth about 5 years back. Hasn't looked at a woman seriously since." Willow's heart constricted at the information. The man had known loss too, then. Perhaps that explained the shadow she had glimpsed behind his eyes. The next few weeks settled into a routine. Willow worked at the Silver Bell in the evenings, kept the books during the day, and slowly began to put aside a small amount of money. She wrote polite letters to her cousin's children during the day and tried not to think about the life she had lost. The whispers followed her in Silverton as they had in Dry Creek. The barren woman, cast aside, damaged goods, but at least here she could support herself. Jackson Ryder did not return to the saloon, and Willow told herself she was not disappointed. She had no business thinking about any man, let alone one with a tragic past and land of his own. She was damaged goods, after all. No man would want her now that her failure as a wife was known. October brought an early snow to the mountains, and with it came news that the trail into town might soon be impassable until spring. Miners hurried to stock supplies, and the Silver Bell was busier than ever. Martha burst into the saloon one afternoon while Willow was balancing the books. There's been an accident at the Lucky Strike mine. They need anyone who can help. They're bringing the injured to the town hall. Willow followed her cousin's wife through the streets to the town hall, which had been hastily converted into a makeshift hospital. Inside was chaos, miners covered in dust and blood, women trying to organize supplies, children running with bandages and water. "You teacher lady," the town doctor called when he spotted Willow. "You can read. I need someone to help me keep track of medicines and injuries." For the next several hours, Willow moved between the injured, writing down names and ailments, helping to clean wounds, and offering what comfort she could. It was grueling, heartbreaking work, but for the first time since arriving in Silverton, she felt useful. She was so focused on her task that she didn't notice the new arrivals until a familiar voice spoke nearby. "Where do you want these supplies, Doc?" Willow looked up to see Jackson Ryder, accompanied by several men who appeared to be his ranch hands, carrying crates of medical supplies. "Over there," the doctor directed. "Ryder, thank God. Did you bring the laudanum? And the bandages? Got your message about the cave-in. Brought what we could spare." The doctor clasped Jackson's shoulder gratefully before hurrying back to a patient. Jackson organized his men, distributing supplies where they were needed most. He worked with the same quiet efficiency Willow had observed in the saloon, moving without wasted motion or words. When he noticed her watching, he paused. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Mississippi? Willow Norman. Miss Norman. From the Silver Bell." He nodded. "You have medical training?" "No, but I can read and write. I'm keeping records for the doctor." He seemed about to say more when a commotion at the door drew their attention. Two men carried in a third, whose leg was clearly broken, the bone protruding through the skin. "Ryder," the doctor called. "Need your help with this one. You've set bones before." Without hesitation, Jackson moved to assist, rolling up his sleeves to reveal strong forearms as he assessed the injury. Willow watched as he spoke quietly to the injured miner, his manner calm and reassuring before he and the doctor worked together to set the bone. The miner screamed once, then passed out, which seemed to be a mercy. Night fell, and still they worked. Willow's back ached and her eyes burned, but she continued, moving from patient to patient, recording information, offering water, holding hands. By dawn, the worst was over. 5 miners had died, but many more had been saved. Willow stepped outside for a moment, gulping the cold, clean air. Her hands were stained with blood and ink, and her dress would likely never be the same. "You should rest." She turned to find Jackson Ryder standing a few feet away, looking as exhausted as she felt. "So should you," she replied. A slight smile curved his lips. "Been through worse." "Have you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He studied her for a moment, then looked toward the mountains where the first light of dawn was touching the peaks. War has a way of putting mining accidents in perspective. "You fought Union cavalry for years." He didn't elaborate, and Willow didn't press. Many men had returned from the war with memories they preferred not to discuss. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the sunrise. Then Jackson cleared his throat. "My men and I will be heading back to the ranch soon. We've got cattle to move to the lower pastures before the next snow." Willow nodded, unsure why he was telling her this. "I want to thank you," he continued. "Not many women would have stayed through the night helping strangers." "It was the right thing to do," she said simply. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Willow felt something shift between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Yes, he agreed softly. It was. The moment was broken by one of his ranch hands calling his name. Jackson nodded to her once more, then turned to go. Willow watched him walk away, aware of an inexplicable sense of loss. The mine accident changed things in Silverton. The town pulled together, caring for the injured and the families of those who had died. Willow found herself involved in organizing relief efforts, using her teaching skills to help miners' children with their lessons while their fathers recovered. For the first time since her arrival, people looked at her with respect rather than pity or curiosity. November arrived with bitter cold and heavy snowfall. The mountain passes closed, isolating Silverton until spring. The Silver Bell remained busy, but the mood was subdued. With no new arrivals, the town turned inward, relying on stored supplies and each other's company to get through the long winter ahead. Willow was surprised one afternoon by a knock at the door of her small room above the saloon. She opened it to find a young boy of about 12, his face red from the cold. "Miss Norman? This is for you." He thrust a package into her hands and turned to leave. "Wait," Willow called. "Who sent this?" "Mr. Ryder, madam. From the Double R." Without further explanation, the boy dashed down the stairs and out into the snow. Willow closed the door and examined the package. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Inside, she found a book, a collection of poetry by Tennyson, and a brief note. "Miss Norman, I recalled you mentioning during the night of the accident that you missed having books to read. My late wife was fond of poetry. Perhaps these words will bring you comfort during the long winter evenings. Respectfully, Jackson Ryder." Willow sat on her bed, running her fingers over the leather cover. She had indeed mentioned missing her books, but she hadn't thought he was listening. She opened the volume carefully and found a pressed wildflower marking a page. The poem was In Memoriam, Tennyson's reflection on grief and loss. The gesture touched her deeply. It wasn't simply the gift itself, but the thoughtfulness behind it, the recognition of her as a person with needs and desires beyond her immediate circumstances. In Dry Creek, Stephen had never understood her love of books, seeing it as a distraction from her wifely duties. That night at the Silver Bell, Willow found herself watching the door, half hoping Jackson might appear. But the weather was too severe for anyone to travel from outlying ranches, and she knew it was foolish to expect him. December brought Christmas preparations and a brief thaw that made travel possible for a few precious days. Silverton came alive with activity as people hurried to take advantage of the open trails to bring in supplies and exchange news with neighboring settlements. Willow was serving drinks one evening when the doors opened, bringing with them a gust of cold air and Jackson Ryder. He stamped snow from his boots and removed his hat, scanning the room until his gaze found hers. A slight nod acknowledged her presence before he made his way to the bar. Willow continued her work, but she was acutely aware of his presence. She had read his wife's book of poetry every night, wondering about the woman who had owned it and the man who had loved her enough to keep her possessions after her death. It was near closing time when Jackson approached her. "Miss Norman," he said, his voice low. "I hope the book was to your liking." "It was very thoughtful, Mr. Ryder." "Thank you." Willow's hands smoothed her apron nervously. "Your wife had excellent taste in literature." A shadow crossed his face at the mention of his wife, but he nodded. "Elizabeth loved words. Said they were windows into worlds we might never see otherwise. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was." His expression softened with memory. "We were childhood sweethearts. Married young." "I'm sorry for your loss," Willow said gently. Jackson studied her for a moment. "Mabel mentioned you were married before coming to Silverton." Willow tensed. Of course, Mabel would have shared her story. In small towns, everyone's business was common knowledge. "Yes, it didn't work out. I'm sorry to hear that." There was no pity in his voice, just simple acknowledgement of her pain. Before she could respond, Mabel called from the bar. "Willow, honey, could you help me with these glasses?" "Excuse me," Willow said, grateful for the interruption. Jackson nodded. Of course. She thought that would be the end of their conversation, but as she helped Mabel close up for the night, she found Jackson waiting by the door. "It's late," he said. "Would you allow me to escort you home?" The offer was unexpected. "I live upstairs, Mr. Ryder. It's hardly necessary." "Humor me," he said with a slight smile. My mother raised me to see ladies safely to their doors, regardless of the distance. Willow hesitated, then nodded. They walked together through the deserted saloon to the back stairs that led to her room. The silence between them was companionable rather than awkward. At her door, she turned to thank him. "You didn't need to do this. I wanted to." He studied her face in the dim light of the hallway. "Willow, Miss Norman, I find myself thinking about you more often than I should." The admission startled her. "Mr. Ryder, Jackson," he corrected. "If we're to be friends, I'd prefer you use my given name." "Friends." The word warmed her. "Jackson, then. Though I'm not sure friendship with me would be wise. People talk." "Let them," he said simply. "I've never much cared for other people's opinions." Willow smiled despite herself. A dangerous attitude in a small town. Perhaps. He returned her smile, and something in his eyes made her heart beat faster. "I'll be in town for a few more days before the weather turns again. Would you consider joining me for dinner tomorrow? The hotel serves a decent meal. Dinner. In public. With a respected rancher. It would certainly set tongues wagging." "I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Because of your former marriage?" Willow looked away. "People know why my husband sent me away." Jackson was quiet for a moment. "And do you believe what they say? That your worth as a woman is tied to your ability to bear children?" The directness of his question took her breath away. No one had ever asked her that before. Everyone had simply assumed her failure was a source of shame. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's what I was raised to believe." "I don't share that belief," Jackson said quietly. "A person's worth isn't determined by such things." Tears pricked at Willow's eyes. She blinked them away, unwilling to show weakness. "That's a progressive view, Mr. E. Jackson." "Not progressive. Just true." He touched his hat in a gesture of respect. "Think about dinner. The invitation stands regardless of your answer." With that, he turned and descended the stairs, leaving Willow staring after him, her heart in turmoil. The next day, Willow vacillated between accepting and declining Jackson's invitation. On one hand, the prospect of an evening in his company was undeniably appealing. On the other, she feared the inevitable gossip and, more deeply, the possibility of disappointment. Jackson claimed not to care about her inability to bear children, but men often said what they thought women wanted to hear. In the end, curiosity won out over caution. She sent a note to the hotel where he was staying, accepting his invitation, and spent the afternoon fretting over her limited wardrobe. The burgundy saloon dress was inappropriate for a respectable dinner, but her everyday dresses were plain and worn. Martha came to her rescue, arriving with a dress of deep blue wool that had belonged to her younger sister. "It's nothing fancy," she apologized, "but it's clean and warm, and the color will suit you." The dress fit well enough with minor adjustments, and Willow arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style. Looking in the small mirror above her washstand, she hardly recognized herself. It had been months since she had dressed for an occasion other than work. Jackson was waiting in the hotel lobby when she arrived, looking handsome in clean clothing that, while still practical for the frontier, showed care in its selection. His eyes warmed when he saw her. "You look lovely," he said, offering his arm. The hotel dining room was modest by Eastern standards, but was considered the finest establishment in Silverton. Several diners looked up as they entered, and Willow felt the weight of their curious stares. Jackson, however, seemed oblivious as he led her to a table by the window. "I took the liberty of ordering in advance," he explained as they were seated. "The options are limited this time of year, but the proprietor assured me the venison stew is excellent." Dinner was surprisingly pleasant. Jackson proved to be an engaging conversationalist, sharing stories of his ranch and his travels without dominating the conversation. He asked questions about her teaching experiences and listened attentively to her responses. Not once did he mention her failed marriage or his deceased wife, keeping the conversation in the present rather than the painful past. "How did you come to ranching?" Willow asked as they enjoyed apple pie for dessert. "My father started the Double R before the war," Jackson explained. "When I returned from fighting, he was ill. Cancer. I took over operations and expanded the property after he passed. It must be a great responsibility." "It is. But there's satisfaction in building something that lasts." He hesitated. "I'd like to show it to you someday. The ranch, I mean, when the weather improves." The invitation hung between them, weighted with meaning. Willow took a sip of her tea to hide her confusion. That's a kind offer. Jackson studied her face. You're skeptical. Cautious, she corrected. I've learned to be. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. I'm not asking for promises, Willow. Just the possibility of getting to know each other better. There was something refreshing about his directness. I'd like that, she admitted. Though I'm not sure what there is to know that would interest you. Everything, he said simply, and the intensity in his eyes made her look away. After dinner, they walked through the quiet streets of Silverton. Snow was falling gently, muffling their footsteps and creating a sense of privacy in the open air. May I ask you something personal? Jackson said as they approached the Silver Bell. Willow tensed but nodded. Your husband, he divorced you because you couldn't have children? The question, though expected, still stung. Yes. And did you want children? With him? Willow stopped walking, surprised by the unexpected direction of his inquiry. Yes. Of course. It's what was expected. That's not what I asked, Jackson said gently. Did you, Willow Norman, want children with that man? The distinction gave her pause. Had she wanted children with Stephen specifically, or had she simply wanted to fulfill her duty as a wife? I wanted to be a mother, she said finally. With Stephen, I wanted to make him happy, to be the wife he needed. Jackson nodded as if her answer confirmed something for him. And he didn't extend you the same consideration? To be the husband you needed? It wasn't like that, Willow protested. He provided for me. He was never cruel. Until he was, Jackson pointed out. Sending you away, humiliating you publicly, those were acts of cruelty, Willow. Tears welled in her eyes. Why are you saying these things? Jackson's expression softened. Because I think you've been carrying blame that isn't yours to bear. A marriage is a partnership. His failure to stand by you in difficulty was as much a breaking of vows as anything you might have done. No one had ever framed it that way before. Willow had always assumed the fault was entirely hers, her body's failure, her inadequacy as a woman. The possibility that Stephen had failed her as well had never occurred to her. They had reached the Silver Bell. Jackson walked her to the back entrance that led to her room. In the shelter of the doorway, they paused. I've upset you, he said. I apologize. Willow shook her head. No, you've given me things to think about. I'll be leaving tomorrow. The weather's turning, and I need to get back to the ranch. He took her hand, his touch warm through her glove. But I'd like to write to you. Would that be acceptable? Letters. A proper courtship, conducted with propriety despite the distance. Yes, she said. I'd like that. He smiled, and in a gesture that caught her completely by surprise, he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Until spring, then. The winter of 1872-1873 was one of the harshest on record in the Colorado Territory. Silverton remained isolated for weeks at a time, the trails impassable due to heavy snow and avalanches. But true to his word, Jackson's letters arrived whenever a messenger could get through. His correspondence was a bright spot in Willow's days. He wrote of practical matters, the ranch, his cattle, the challenges of winter on the frontier, but also shared his thoughts on books they had both read and asked her opinion on various topics. Never once did he mention her inability to have children or treat her as diminished because of it. Willow found herself opening up in her replies, sharing thoughts and feelings she had kept guarded for years. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, her love of teaching, and eventually, the pain of her failed marriage. Writing to Jackson became a form of healing, a way to reclaim parts of herself that she had suppressed or forgotten. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Willow realized something both wonderful and terrifying. She was falling in love with Jackson Ryder. The realization brought not joy but fear. She had failed one husband. What right did she have to dream of another? And despite Jackson's assurances, could any man truly accept a barren wife? April brought the thaw, and with it came Jackson himself, riding into Silverton with the first supply wagons of the season. Willow was in the general store when he arrived, helping Martha select fabric for new curtains. Through the window, she saw him dismount in front of the hotel, tall and straight in the saddle, looking no worse for the hard winter. Their eyes met through the glass, and the smile that spread across his face sent warmth coursing through her. He tipped his hat in acknowledgement, but didn't approach, giving her space and time. That evening, he came to the Silver Bell. The saloon was crowded, celebrating the reopening of the trails with an impromptu dance. A fiddler played lively tunes in the corner, and tables had been pushed aside to create space for dancing. Jackson made his way through the crowd to where Willow was serving drinks. "Evening, Miss Norman," he said formally, though his eyes were warm with more intimate recognition. "Mr. Ryder," she returned his greeting. "Welcome back to Silverton." "Thank you. I was wondering if you might honor me with a dance." Several nearby patrons looked up with interest. Willow hesitated, then glanced at Mabel, who waved her off with a knowing smile. "Go on, honey. I can manage for one dance." Jackson led Willow to the makeshift dance floor. His hand at her waist was steady and respectful as they joined the other couples moving to the music. He was a surprisingly good dancer, guiding her confidently through the steps. "Your letters kept me company through the winter," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "As yours did me," she replied. "Though I must admit, I worried when January came and went without word." A rockslide took out part of the trail. No one could get through for nearly a month. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "I missed you, Willow." The simple admission made her heart skip. "I missed you too." They danced in silence for a moment, the music wrapping around them like a cocoon. "Would you still like to see the ranch?" Jackson asked as the song drew to a close. "Now that the weather's improved, I mean." Willow looked up at him, reading the hope in his eyes. "Yes," she said, "I would." 2 days later, Willow found herself riding beside Jackson on the trail to the Double R. He had brought a gentle mare for her to ride and had been patient with her limited experience on horseback. The day was clear and warm, the mountains still capped with snow, but the valley coming alive with spring growth. "It's beautiful," Willow said as they crested a rise and the ranch came into view. The main house was a substantial 2-story structure built of logs and stone, with several outbuildings and corrals spread out around it. In the distance, cattle grazed on green pastures. "It's home," Jackson said simply, but the pride in his voice was evident. As they approached, several ranch hands stopped their work to wave or call greetings. Jackson introduced Willow to each man they passed, treating his employees with respect and familiarity. "Most of these men have been with me for years," he explained as they dismounted in front of the house. "Good workers. Loyal." The interior of the ranch house surprised Willow. She had expected a bachelor's Spartan accommodations, but the rooms were comfortably furnished with a mixture of practical frontier pieces and a few finer items that must have come from the East. Bookshelves lined one wall of the main room, filled with volumes on a variety of subjects. "Elizabeth's influence," Jackson said, following her gaze to the books. "She insisted that just because we lived on the frontier didn't mean we had to live without civilization's comforts." "She was right," Willow said, running her fingers along the spines of the books. "A home should reflect the people who live in it." Jackson showed her through the house, including a small study where he kept the ranch records and a kitchen that, while simple, was well equipped. The upper floor held several bedrooms, most unused but maintained. "It's a big house for one person," Willow observed as they returned downstairs. "Too big," Jackson agreed. "I built it with a family in mind." He led her out onto the porch, where they sat in chairs overlooking the property. "Willow, there's something I need to tell you." His serious tone alarmed her. "What is it?" Jackson looked out at his land, gathering his thoughts. "When Elizabeth died, I thought I'd never want another wife. The pain was overwhelming. For a long time, I just focused on the ranch, on building something that would last." Willow waited, her heart pounding. "Meeting you changed that." He turned to face her. "I know it hasn't been long, and I know you have your own pain to heal from, but I find myself thinking of the future again. A future that includes you, if you're willing." "Jackson," Willow's voice faltered. "You know I can't give you children. If you're looking for a family, I'm looking for a partner," he interrupted gently. "Someone to share my life with. Children would be a blessing, but they're not a requirement." Tears filled Willow's eyes. "You say that now, but what about in a year? 5 years? When other men's wives are giving them sons and daughters, will you still feel the same?" Jackson took her hands in his. "Willow, look at me." When she raised her eyes to his, he continued, "I lost a wife and child once. I know the pain of that loss, but I also know that there are many ways to make a family. There are children who need homes, orphans from the war, from mining accidents, from illness. If we decide we want children, there are ways to have them that don't depend on your ability to bear them." His words opened a door in Willow's heart that she had thought permanently closed. The possibility of a real future, with a man who saw her as whole despite her perceived failings was almost too much to comprehend. "I'm not asking for an answer today," Jackson said, releasing her hands. "Just think about it. About us. I believe we could build something good together." The ride back to Silverton was quiet, both of them lost in thought. At the edge of town, Jackson stopped his horse. "I have business in Denver," he said. "I'll be gone for about 3 weeks. When I return, well, I hope you'll have an answer for me." Willow nodded, unable to trust her voice. He escorted her to her door, said a polite goodbye, and rode away, leaving her with a decision that would shape the rest of her life. The following weeks were a time of deep reflection for Willow. She continued her work at the Silver Bell, but her mind was often elsewhere, weighing possibilities and examining her heart. She thought of Stephen and the humiliation of being cast aside. She thought of Jackson and his steady presence, his respect for her mind and spirit. Martha noticed her distraction. "He's a good man, Willow," she said one afternoon as they walked back from church. "And he looks at you like you hung the moon. But what if it doesn't last?" Willow voiced her deepest fear. "What if he realizes I'm not enough?" Martha stopped walking and turned to face her cousin. "What if he doesn't? What if this is your chance at happiness, and you're too afraid to take it? Sometimes faith isn't just about God, Willow. Sometimes it's about believing in people too." The words stayed with Willow, echoing in her mind as she went about her days. Faith in people. Faith in Jackson. Faith in herself. When Jackson returned from Denver, Willow was waiting at the stagecoach stop. He spotted her immediately, his face lighting up with surprise and pleasure. He made his way through the crowd to reach her. "Willow," he said, his voice warm with welcome. "I didn't expect to see you here. I wanted to meet you," she said simply. "I have your answer." Jackson's expression grew serious. "And what is it?" "Yes," Willow said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Yes, I believe we could build something good together too." The smile that spread across Jackson's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. In full view of the townspeople, he gathered her hands in his and raised them to his lips. "You've made me the happiest man in the Colorado Territory." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Silverton. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with Martha and Abel standing as witnesses. Willow wore a new dress of pale blue silk that Jackson had brought back from Denver, and he wore a new suit that made him look every inch the successful rancher he was. "I, Jackson, take you, Willow, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice clear and confident. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When it was her turn, Willow's voice trembled slightly, but grew stronger with each word. "I, Willow, take you, Jackson, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." The minister pronounced them man and wife, and Jackson kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. As they walked out of the church into the spring sunshine, Willow felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She was no longer Willow Norman, the barren woman cast aside. She was Willow Ryder, cherished wife, beginning a new life with a man who saw her value beyond her ability to bear children. Life at the Double R was a significant adjustment for Willow. After years in towns, the relative isolation of the ranch took some getting used to. But she found satisfaction in creating a home with Jackson, in organizing the household, and in getting to know the men who worked the land. Their physical relationship developed slowly, with Jackson showing patience and consideration for her past experiences. On their wedding night, he had sensed her nervousness and had simply held her, telling her that they had all the time in the world. "Marriage isn't just about what happens in bed," he had said, stroking her hair. "It's about building a life together, day by day." When they did come together physically, it was with a tenderness and passion that healed old wounds. Jackson was a considerate lover, attentive to her needs and desires in a way Stephen had never been. With him, Willow discovered aspects of herself she hadn't known existed, a capacity for pleasure, and an ability to give joy that transcended her previous experiences. Summer passed in a haze of happiness. Jackson taught Willow to ride properly, and they often explored the ranch together, picnicking beside streams or in meadows full of wildflowers. In the evenings, they read aloud to each other from the books in the library or simply sat on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about their days. Willow established a small school for the children of the ranch hands, finding joy once again in teaching. She wrote to her former students in Dry Creek, sharing news of her new life and inquiring after their progress. Their replies, full of childish enthusiasm and misspelled words, brought both laughter and a few tears. In late August, Willow began to feel unwell. At first, she attributed it to the change in altitude or perhaps something she had eaten. But when the nausea persisted, particularly in the mornings, a different possibility began to form in her mind. She said nothing to Jackson, not wanting to raise false hopes. 5 years of marriage to Stephen had taught her the disappointment of mistaking ordinary illness for pregnancy symptoms. But when her monthly cycle failed to appear for the second time, she could no longer ignore the signs. The ranch's cook, Mrs. Harmon, an older woman with grown children of her own, noticed Willow's condition before she voiced it. "Been feeling poorly in the mornings, have you?" she asked one day as Willow pushed away a plate of eggs she couldn't stomach. "A bit," Willow admitted. Mrs. Harmon nodded knowingly. "And your monthly visitor? Has she been regular?" Willow blushed at the direct question, but shook her head. "I thought as much." Mrs. Harmon's weathered face creased in a smile. "You might want to speak to the doc next time he comes through. Though I'd wager my best pie that he'll confirm what I suspect you're carrying a child, Mrs. Ryder." The words sent a shock through Willow's system. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I can't. I couldn't." "Begging your pardon, madam. But it seems you can, and you did." Mrs. Harmon patted her hand. "Sometimes all a body needs is the right conditions to flourish, like a seed needing the right soil and sun." Willow placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach. Could it be true? After years of trying with Stephen, could she really be carrying Jackson's child? The possibility was too precious, too fragile to voice aloud. That evening, she sat on the porch, watching Jackson return from checking the herd. The sight of him on horseback, silhouetted against the setting sun, filled her with a love so intense it was almost painful. This man who had given her back her sense of worth, who had never once made her feel less than whole, could she really be giving him the gift of a child? Jackson dismounted and handed the reins to one of the hands before climbing the porch steps to join her. "You're looking thoughtful," he observed, bending to kiss her. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in a year," she said, making room for him beside her on the swing. "Last autumn, I was serving drinks at the Silver Bell and trying to build a life alone. Now, he prompted when she trailed off. Willow took a deep breath. "Jackson, I need to tell you something, but I don't want you to get your hopes up. I'm not certain yet." His expression grew concerned. "What is it? Are you unwell?" "No, at least I don't think so." She took his hand and placed it over her abdomen. I believe I might be with child." Jackson went very still, his eyes searching her face. "Willow," he breathed. "Are you sure?" "Not entirely," she admitted. "But the signs are there. I've missed my monthly twice now, and I've been feeling sick in the mornings." A range of emotions crossed his face: hope, fear, joy, caution. "We should send for the doctor," he said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "He's due to visit the Johnson place next week. I thought we might ride over." Willow squeezed his hand. "Jackson, please don't be disappointed if I'm wrong." "You know what the doctors in Arizona said?" He silenced her with a gentle kiss. "What doctors say isn't always the final word. But Willow, listen to me." He cupped her face in his hands. "If you are carrying our child, I will be overjoyed. But if you're not, it changes nothing about how I feel about you or our life together. You are enough, exactly as you are. Do you understand?" Tears spilled down Willow's cheeks. "I understand," she whispered. And for the first time, she truly did. The revelation was as powerful as the possibility of the child. She might be carrying the knowledge that her worth was inherent, not dependent on her ability to produce children. Jackson drew her into his arms, and they sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, both afraid to hope too much, but unable to stop the tendrils of joy unfurling in their hearts. The following week, they rode to the Johnson homestead where Dr. Mitchell was making his rounds. The elderly physician examined Willow in the Johnson's spare bedroom, while Jackson waited anxiously outside. "Well, Mrs. Ryder," Dr. Mitchell said when he had completed his examination, "I'd say congratulations are in order. You're about 3 months along, by my estimation. The baby should arrive sometime in early spring." Willow stared at him, unable to fully process his words. "You're certain?" "As certain as medical science allows." He patted her hand. "I understand you had difficulties in your previous marriage?" "Yes. The doctors in Arizona said I was barren." Dr. Mitchell snorted. "Doctors can be wrong, Mrs. Ryder. Sometimes the issue isn't with the woman at all, but with the man. Or sometimes it's simply a matter of timing and circumstance. The human body is a mysterious thing." Willow dressed slowly, her mind reeling with the news. A baby. Jackson's baby. Growing inside her right now. The miracle of it was almost too much to comprehend. When she emerged from the bedroom, Jackson was on his feet immediately, his expression a question he was afraid to ask. "Dr. Mitchell says we should expect a baby in early spring," Willow said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill over. For a moment, Jackson stood frozen, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then he crossed the room in 2 strides and gathered her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that spoke volumes more than words could express. "Careful with my patient, Mr. Ryder," Dr. Mitchell chuckled as he packed his bag. "She's carrying precious cargo." Jackson set Willow down gently, but kept his arms around her. "Thank you, Doctor," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "for confirming what we hoped." The ride back to the double R was filled with plans and dreams. Jackson insisted Willow ride at a gentle pace, treating her as if she were made of glass. "I'm pregnant, not ill," she reminded him with a laugh. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, most of them while continuing to work hard every day." "Not my wife," Jackson said firmly. "You'll take it easy. Mrs. Harmon can handle more of the household duties, and we'll hire a girl from town to help with the school." Willow might have argued, but the love and concern in his eyes melted her resistance. And truthfully, the idea of being cared for, of being valued enough to be protected, was a novel and not unpleasant experience after years of feeling inadequate. That night, as they lay in bed, Jackson's hand rested protectively over her still flat stomach. "I can hardly believe it," he murmured. "A child. Our child. Are you happy?" Willow asked, though she knew the answer. Beyond words. He propped himself up on one elbow to look at her in the moonlight streaming through the window. "But Willow, I meant what I said before. Even if this hadn't happened, you would still be everything I want and need." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I know. That's why I think it did happen. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to be a mother to prove my worth. I was just being your wife, living our life." He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "You are my life. You and this child we've made together." As autumn gave way to winter, Willow's body changed in ways that both amazed and occasionally alarmed her. Her stomach grew rounder, her breasts fuller, and she felt the first fluttering movements of the baby inside her. Jackson watched these changes with wonder, his love for her deepening with each passing day. They prepared the nursery together, converting one of the unused bedrooms into a space for their child. Jackson built a cradle with his own hands, working on it in the evenings by the fire. Willow sewed tiny garments and quilted a blanket, each stitch a prayer for the child growing beneath her heart. News of her pregnancy spread through the region, reaching even as far as Dry Creek. Martha, who maintained correspondence with friends there, reported that Stephen Norman had indeed remarried, but his new wife had yet to conceive after more than a year of marriage. "Seems the problem might not have been with you after all," Martha observed during a visit to the ranch. Willow, now visibly pregnant at 6 months, merely nodded. She had no desire for revenge or satisfaction at Stephen's continued childlessness. Her happiness with Jackson had healed those wounds, leaving only occasional scars that twinged when the weather of memory changed. Winter on the Double R was a time of relative quiet. The cattle required less attention, and the ranch hands had more time for leisure. Jackson organized weekly gatherings in the main house, where music was played, stories were told, and community was built around the large hearth. Willow, despite her advancing pregnancy, made sure everyone was fed and comfortable, finding joy in creating a home that welcomed not just family, but the extended community of the ranch. As Christmas approached, a letter arrived that surprised Willow. It was from one of her former students in Dry Creek, now old enough to write independently. "Dear Mrs. Norman, or I suppose it's Mrs. Ryder now," the letter began. "I hope this finds you well. We miss you at the school. The new teacher doesn't explain things as well as you did. I heard from my ma that you're going to have a baby. I'm glad. You were always kind to us children, so I think you'll be a good mother. Your friend, Emma Carter." The simple words brought tears to Willow's eyes. She had thought herself forgotten in Dry Creek, erased by her shameful departure. But this child had remembered her, had thought well of her, had taken the time to write. "Good news?" Jackson asked, finding her wiping her eyes at the kitchen table. Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. He read it quickly, then smiled. "Smart girl, this Emma. She sees clearly. I never thought anyone there would remember me kindly," Willow admitted. "I left under such a cloud." Jackson pulled her gently to her feet and into his arms, maneuvering around her rounded belly. "People remember kindness, Willow. Whatever else happened in Dry Creek, you were kind to the children in your care. That matters." She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I hope our child has your wisdom. And your compassion," he countered, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Christmas at the Double R was a festive affair. The house was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, and Mrs. Harmon outdid herself with a feast that would have impressed even the finest Eastern households. Gifts were exchanged, carols were sung, and as Willow sat beside Jackson watching the celebration, she felt a completeness she had never known before. "Next Christmas, there will be one more at our table," Jackson murmured, his hand covering hers where it rested on her belly. "God willing," Willow replied, feeling the baby shift beneath her palm as if in agreement. January brought heavy snow that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. Willow, now in her 8th month, found movement increasingly difficult but took comfort in the cozy nest she and Jackson had created. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading to each other and to the baby yet to be born, planning for the future, and sometimes just sitting in companionable silence. It was during one such evening that Willow felt the first pains. She had been experiencing practice contractions for weeks, but these were different, sharper, more insistent, and coming at regular intervals. "Jackson," she said, trying to keep her voice calm, "I think it might be time to send for Mrs. Harmon and the midwife." His head snapped up from the book he was reading. "Now? But it's still weeks before the doctor said, babies don't always follow doctor's schedules," Willow said with a smile that turned into a grimace as another pain gripped her. Jackson was on his feet instantly, helping her to their bedroom before rushing to send one of the hands for Mrs. Harmon, who lived in a small cabin on the property, and another to fetch the midwife from a neighboring ranch. The labor was long and difficult. February storms raged outside, mirroring the intensity of Willow's struggle within. Mrs. Harmon and the midwife, Mrs. Cooper, worked together efficiently, their experienced hands guiding Willow through the process. Jackson refused to leave her side, holding her hand through each contraction, wiping her brow, and murmuring encouragement when her strength flagged. "I can't," Willow gasped after hours of pushing. "I can't do this." "You can," Jackson insisted, his face pale with concern but his voice steady. "You're the strongest person I know, Willow Ryder. Our child is counting on that strength." The words gave her renewed determination. With a final, monumental effort, Willow pushed, and into the world came their daughter, her lusty cries filling the room as the storm outside began to abate. "A girl," Mrs. Cooper announced, cleaning and wrapping the infant before placing her in Willow's trembling arms. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Willow looked down at the tiny face, perfect in every detail: the rosebud mouth, the button nose, the wispy dark hair that promised to be as black as Jackson's. A miracle made flesh. A child they had created together. "Hello, little one," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "We've been waiting for you." Jackson sat on the edge of the bed, his face wet with unashamed tears as he reached out to touch his daughter's cheek with a gentle finger. "She's perfect," he said hoarsely, "just like her mother." They named her Elizabeth Hope Ryder, Elizabeth for Jackson's first wife, whose memory deserved honor, and hope for what she represented to both of them. A new beginning, a promise fulfilled, a future bright with possibility. As spring returned to the Colorado Territory, Willow often sat on the porch of the Double R, her daughter nursing contentedly at her breast, watching Jackson work with the horses in the corral. Her body had recovered from the birth, and with each passing day, she felt stronger, more confident in her role as both wife and mother. One evening, as the sun was setting and Elizabeth slept peacefully in her cradle, Jackson joined Willow on the porch swing. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "Do you ever think about Stephen?" Jackson asked suddenly. "About what happened in Dry Creek." The question surprised her, but Willow considered it honestly. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not with regret or bitterness anymore. Just recognition that if things had been different there, I might never have found my way here." "To you?" "To Elizabeth." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "When Elizabeth, my first wife, died, I thought my life was over. I couldn't imagine finding happiness again." He turned to look at Willow, his eyes reflecting the last light of the day. "But here we are, living proof that endings can lead to new beginnings." "Here we are," Willow agreed, reaching for his hand. "And I wouldn't change a thing, not even the painful parts. They all led me to this moment, to this life with you." He leaned down to kiss her, a kiss full of tenderness and promise. From inside the house came the first soft sounds of Elizabeth waking from her nap, ready to be fed and held and loved. "Our daughter calls," Jackson said with a smile, helping Willow to her feet. Together, they went inside to tend to their child, their miracle, the living embodiment of a love that had healed old wounds and created new life. As Willow lifted Elizabeth into her arms, she thought of the journey that had brought her here from the schoolhouse floor in Dry Creek, where a wedding ring had fallen, to this moment of perfect contentment. She had been cast aside as worthless, deemed a failure as a woman. But Jackson had seen her differently, had valued her for herself, had loved her without conditions or expectations. And in the safety of that love, her body had done what she had been told was impossible, created life. As if reading her thoughts, Jackson wrapped his arms around both her and their daughter, creating a circle of family, of belonging. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "Both of you, more than I have words to say." "I know," Willow replied, leaning back against his strength. "I've always known. Ever since that night in the Silver Bell when you stood up for a woman you didn't even know." "Best decision I ever made," Jackson said with a soft laugh. Starting a conversation with the prettiest schoolteacher turned barmaid in the Colorado Territory. Elizabeth gurgled in agreement, her tiny hand reaching up to pat Willow's cheek. Outside, the sun set on another day at the Double R, but inside the ranch house, in the circle of Jackson's arms, with their daughter between them, Willow knew that their story was still just beginning. The woman who had been cast aside had found her place, her purpose, her family. And the tears that had once fallen in sorrow had been transformed, through the alchemy of love, into the most precious gift of all, a child born of hope, of second chances, and of a love strong enough to heal even the deepest wounds.